All right, everybody, we are continuing our study in Encounters with Jesus. And this week we're going to actually be continuing on into John chapter 12, and we're going to see a really unusual encounter between two different people, complete opposite people, and the encounter that they had with Jesus. And it was just a couple of weeks before his crucifixion in Jerusalem. You remember last week we talked about how Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and we're back with that same family with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. But there are a few other people because Jesus has come back to Bethany and he is on his way to Jerusalem, and he is having supper with in a man's house called Simon the leper, and Mary and Martha are there as well as Lazarus. Martha is preparing dinner, and Lazarus is seated at the table, and Mary does something very extraordinary. The disciples are there also, and the disciple that we're going to be looking at today is Judas Iscariot. And if you know anything about Judas, you know that he was not the one that really loved Jesus. So before we go into it, I want to read the passage. It's only 11 verses today, so I thought I would read it to you. So 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me." When the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. So here we have a really interesting story and what's happening. So they're at this house. Martha is serving dinner. Lazarus is at the table, and when it says reclining, it's because people didn't sit at the table like we do in chairs. They actually had very low tables to the ground, and then they had cushions that they would kind of lie on instead of sitting. And so it was kind of the way that they would eat, and they would lie on these cushions, and they would take food from big platters that were on these low tables, and then they would eat. And so that's why they used the word reclining. Mary had a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard. Nard is a flower that is found in the Himalaya mountains over near India, very far away. So really, it wasn't even part of what you could find in Israel. It was very, very expensive, and it had been brought, and it cost 300 denarii, and 300 denarii at that time was what a person made in an entire year of work. And I brought with me a couple of perfumes. This is the one that I made at home, and this is the one that you will be seeing in the video that comes at the end of this lesson. But I found this little bottle at the dollar store, and you can actually make perfume at home if you want. But this perfume is a perfume that I bought for my daughter a year and a half ago, and it's expensive. It's not one that you can just buy at the CVS pharmacy. You have to go to a nicer store to buy this. And I bought this for her because it's her favorite, and you can tell that she's used quite a bit of it, but there's still some in there. And I gave this to her a year and a half ago for her birthday. So you can tell that she does not use it very often because it's expensive. And so she uses it only on those special occasions when she wants to do something nice. And so she has this perfume, and it's a really nice one. This is kind of like what this perfume was that Mary was using to put on Jesus' feet. And it's very significant, and we're going to be talking about symbolism today. We've talked about metaphors. Today we're going to be talking about symbolism, and we'll get into that in a minute. But this ointment or this perfume that she used was extremely expensive because it came from so far away, and the process to make it was so difficult. And so she had this, and she came in, and what did she do? She poured it on Jesus' feet, and then she took her hair, because it was long, and she took her hair and then she just wiped it all over his feet. Now think about this. He's lying at the table, next to the table. So she's down on the ground, and this is a very humble position for her to be in. And then she's using her own hair to wipe his feet. Okay, this is a very sure sign of how much Mary loved Jesus. If you read other stories about Mary, we know that she must have been very, very a word like I like to use is perceptive. I think she always had a very sharp and keen interest in who Jesus was, what he was doing on earth, and what this meant for her, because she was just always very close to Jesus. She was either sitting at his feet, she fell at his feet when she encountered him at Lazarus, just before she took him to Lazarus' grave. And now she's on her knees again at his feet, always at the feet of Jesus, because she was one to learn, to perceive that Jesus' ministry was both very special and that he was going to be crucified. And this was something that was going to be very deeply hurting for her. So she bought a very expensive perfume. She poured it on his feet and she wiped it with her hair. And seeing this, Judas Iscariot, immediately he says, "What a waste. Why is she doing that? We could have used that money. Instead of spending that money on perfume, we could have used that money and given it to the poor." But it says here that he wasn't really concerned about the poor. He was the one in charge of the money, which meant he kept it in a bag on his side. And so whenever they needed to buy something, he was the one that gave it out. But what? Judas was dishonest. He was also taking some of the money out for himself and not using it for the ministry. So he wasn't so concerned about the poor. He was more concerned about what he was not going to get from that 300 denarii that he could have used. That was a lot of money. The disciples, if you read a different passage that talks about this, the disciples kind of got in on it and said, "Why is she doing that? I don't understand. So silly." But Jesus said, "Just leave her be, because she is keeping it for the day of my burial." And here is the symbolism. When people died in Israel, at that time, they didn't do things like what we do here in the United States and use chemicals to embalm the body. What they did was they used expensive herbs and spices and perfumes and just covered the body and wrapped the body up. Lazarus' body probably had been prepared that way when they put him in the tomb. It talks about when he comes out and he's all wrapped up, but the fact is he probably had all kinds of herbs and spices all over his body too, because they used that. Because as I said, if you've ever been near a dead animal or something and it's been there for a couple of days, it smells really bad. So these herbs and spices were used because it would keep the smell to be not so bad. That's part of the reason. The other part of the reason is it's a way of preparing and cleaning the body to be ready for burial. And this is what she was doing. This was a symbol of what? This was what we call also foreshadowing. It was almost as if she knew that Jesus would be dead in just a couple of weeks. And so she is using this expensive perfume and she is starting to put it on his body, almost as if she's preparing it to be buried. And he says, you know, the poor are always going to be here. And it's not like he doesn't care about the poor. What he's saying is she is focused on what's more important right now. And the more important thing right now is the fact that I am going to be dead in a couple of weeks. The poor will still be here, and you'll be able to minister to them. But right now, she needs to do this for me because I will not always be here. Mary understood this. The disciples did not. And then afterwards, of course, the Jews heard that he was there, and they also heard about Lazarus. And so everybody wanted to come and see this man who had been dead, but was alive again. And then the chief priests, not only do they now want to kill Jesus, they want to kill Lazarus because many people believed. Remember the miracles? Because of miracles that Jesus performed, they were to glorify God and so that people would believe. So we see what we're looking at here is a difference in priorities, okay? Mary's priorities versus Judas Iscariot's priorities. Priorities are those things that we think are very important. So Mary obviously loved Jesus very, very much. How do we know that? She bought a very expensive perfume. She didn't just go down to CVS and buy a real cheap perfume that you can just pick up off of the shelf. No, she went to a perfumer and bought a very, very expensive and rare perfume to take and put on Jesus' feet. And then she poured it on his feet. When you think about feet, and I like to go barefoot. I can't always, but I like to go barefoot. And when I was a kid, I was barefoot all the time, and I would run around outside. And when I came in, my feet were pretty dirty. And if you think about Israel, where it's dry and it's hot, and people wore sandals. So imagine, one of the things that they would do was they would wash their feet when they came in the house. But the fact is, when you think about feet, you think about, they're not really the cleanest things, are they? But she anoints his feet. And then she uses her own hair to wipe his feet. Why would she do that? Why would she put this perfume all over her hair to wipe his feet? It shows the great love that she had for Jesus. And it shows the symbolism of his coming death. And so only a person who truly loved Jesus, and the person that Mary was, would really understand what she was doing. And then there's Judas Iscariot. What were his priorities? Well, his priorities were not Jesus. They were himself. And in fact, it's not so much that he didn't like Jesus. He really hated Jesus. He was a bad person. He thought that the money should have been used for the poor. And I say that in quotes because he didn't really think that. He just was more concerned about having the money in his pocket so that he could take it out and put it in his other pocket, so that the money that was used for the ministry was a little less than what it should have been. His priorities weren't right. He was not thinking about what was important. He thought that she wasted it by pouring it on Jesus' feet. He thought it was just a waste. Why would she just pour it out like that, especially on his feet? It was such a waste because now you can't use the perfume for anything else because it's poured out. And this was a really good insight, again, into what he would do next, because what did he do? Eventually, he went to the chief priests and he said, I can take you to Jesus. And the chief priests gave him money. So he even sold out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, which is nothing compared to the 300 denarii that she paid for the perfume. So you think about these priorities. What are your priorities? Do you love Jesus? Would you spend a year's salary or a year's wages and buy something expensive to pour it on his feet? Or would you be that person that would reprimand her, that would scold her for wasting it because you're more interested in using the money for yourself? You have to think about these things, about yourself. Analyze, think about yourself, And if you really feel like you have some of these feelings, you need to ask the Lord to help you and to pray and to forgive you for these feelings. So today, before we finish up, I just wanted to show you that I have included here some points, the text, some points, and then a few comprehension questions for you to think about and answer honestly. I've also included for some of you younger kids something to color. This actually shows Jesus sitting because it was hard to find a coloring page that had him actually reclining. And then here is the recipe for making perfume with flowers. And that is the video that we're going to get into in just a few minutes. In the meantime, I miss you all very much. I look forward to being back in church, and it seems like we'll be able to be back here pretty soon. So I'm looking forward to seeing you again. But until then, next week, we will do another encounter with Jesus. Have a good week. All right, everybody, today, our activity, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to make some perfume, homemade perfume. If you've never done this before, great. I've never done it either. So we're going to learn together, but I did include a recipe in your handout that you can use, and that's the recipe that I'm using. And I'm using one that you actually use making, you make perfume making with flowers. And so I happen to have roses in my yard, and you can see I have lots and lots of rose buds. And so I'm going to cut a few of those off because we're going to use the petals to make the perfume. So I just want to get the ones that have some nice petals on them. And we need about 1.5 cups of petals. So I'll get these ones that are actually fully opened so that, oops, I lost one. So that these other ones that are going to still open can do that. And I think we'll do one more. Let's see, let's do this one. Okay, so let's go in the house and we'll pick it up from there. Okay, so we're back in the house and I brought my flowers in, and you can see that I already have a few petals in the bowl here. And you need a bowl that's a medium-sized bowl that has a lid, and I will be putting the lid on it in a little bit. What you do is you line the bowl with cheesecloth, and you put that in the bowl, and then you're going to add your flower petals to it. So how am I going to do that? You just pull them right off. And this is what actually lets the scent out of the petals, is by doing that. And we're going to chop them a little bit too. Okay, so I've taken the petals off. I'm going to get my little chopper and chop them up a little bit, and this will release the scent too. Okay. Now I'm going to add 2 cups of distilled water. I don't have distilled water, so I'm going to use water from my refrigerator. Because that's been run through a filter. If your flowers are really dirty, you should wash them a little bit first and get the dirt off of them because you don't really want it. But now what you're going to do is you're going to cover the flowers with the water. And then you're going to take the lid and cover it and just let that sit overnight. So we'll be back tomorrow to finish up. Okay, so we've let these sit overnight. And now what I need to do is take the petals inside the cheesecloth, squeeze it all out to make sure all of the fragrance and everything gets out. So you just squeeze it like that. All right, and then we're going to pour this into a pan. And start cooking it down. So I'm going to turn it on high right now until it boils. And then after it boils, I'm going to turn it down to simmer and just let it go until it all evaporates. So you're going to want to, after it boils and you turn it down, you're going to want to take the top off. Okay, now we're finishing up, and I've boiled down the water to just having a little bit, and I put a little bit of red food coloring in it just to give it a little bit of color. So now we're going to take it and we're going to pour it into the bottle through a funnel because that makes it less mess. And you see, it's in the bottle now. Put the stopper on it. Homemade perfume. So try it at home, and when you do it, remember the story about Mary and the expensive perfume that she bought and then used to wipe the feet of Jesus with her hair.